voters saying they'd back neither. It's all research this week. Let's bring in our panel. With me here in Canberra, Grahame Morris from Barton Deakin. Good afternoon to you. And from Brisbane this afternoon, Bruce Hawker, the former Labor strategist. Welcome to you both. Let's just start on the budget itself. And, you know, we've had lots of bad news already. Bruce, do you think there will be any good news tomorrow night from the Treasurer? And if there is any good news, is the problem here that no one will believe it?
Look, I think there probably will be some good news. You'd have to think that, they've cleared the decks of most of the bad stuff in the last week or two. So it would be inconceivable that they wouldn't be coming out with some positive stories tomorrow. Look, they have taken a hit when it comes to credibility around the budget, but I think they've just got to push through that and turn the focus in the coming days and weeks, once we get past the budget, on to Tony Abbott and his spending commitments, the sort of thing that we were just talking about, or you were just talking about then, the lack of support for the paid parental leave scheme of Tony Abbott's and so forth, where the money's coming from. So they've got to get through this period, but it does give them...
Labor's got to have something more than talking about Tony Abbott going into this election. It's got to have some sort of plan for why it deserves a third term.
Absolutely, and I think tomorrow absolutely opens up the way for the Gonski education reforms to come into play. I think that's going to be a big part of Labor's campaign over the next few months, and that's all dependent on having a budget that can support that level of spending, which is going to be very considerable. But it does go into their narrative about having to be extremely competitive in the Asian Pacific century. We've got to have a well-educated young group of young people, otherwise we'll fall behind Asia. So they've got things that they can talk about. They can talk about their vision. They can talk about respectable cuts in spending and not introducing 2 new levies, for example, as Tony Abbott is going to do. So there will be some positive and there will be some negative messages coming out of it.
Grahame, normally in the lead up to an election you get a lot of goodies in the budget. Do you think, though, it is a different circumstance this time, that people are actually going to respect some restraint?
Look, there won't be as many goodies, but there'll be a few. But look, this may well be the first budget that's upstaged by a soap opera about a horse. And the government doesn't help itself. I was just looking today. We've had Minister Snowden on Gallipoli, Minister Albanese on road funding, Minister Carr on foreign aid, Minister Plibersek on bulk billing. We had a group grope of the cabinet sort of pictures. But what's the message from the Treasurer? What's the message that he's trying to get out there? And you think, oh, fellas, what are you doing? You're all over the place. But budgets are really strange. Nobody actually reads the budget papers except half a dozen journos, 2 board economists and a couple of bankers. But by 10 o'clock tomorrow, most Australians will have a view whether the budget's good or bad. And every leader and every treasurer I've known, going right back to Malcolm Fraser, they will want to know tomorrow night, just as when the papers are about to come out, they say, what is on the front page of the Daily Telegraph and the Melbourne Sun? What's the headline and what's the cartoon? And the most powerful people in Australia on budget day, not the Treasurer, it's the headline writers for the 2 popular papers and the cartoon that tells the story of the headline. And people get an impression from that.
Well, let me just go to the latest budget cut announced today. Foreign aid, it's not actually being cut, but the promised increase is being delayed by another year. Grahame, what do you think? There probably aren't too many votes in foreign aid spending.
No, there's not. Look, if you're going to have a tightish budget, and I don't think there's going to be a tight budget, but a tightish budget, it doesn't look good if you're spending money offshore. And it's just so easy for journalists, headline writers and everyone else to say, hey, the Treasurer looked after people in the Cook Islands and every sort of country in Eastern Europe that ends in Stan, but he forgot his own people. And that is just politically too deadly. And I do understand why Minister Carr was allowed to sort of go out there and say, hey, we're going to cut this. But there's a touch of hypocrisy in all of this. They've been whinging for years about the coalition and foreign aid, and here they are, they've done it themselves and are claiming that it's good.
Bruce, the point I was trying to get to with the Minister earlier is that this is just another in a list now of commitments that have been broken.
Well, I think in some respects that's true. However, as he pointed out, the amount of money that's been spent on foreign aid continues to grow remarkably. I mean, was it 9% year on year since this government was elected in 2007? I mean, any business would like to have that sort of growth in its income. So that's a lot of money to be spending on foreign aid, and I think most people would recognise that. And in fact, the danger in even discussing this is that you get a backlash against it by people that say we shouldn't be spending that much. They didn't make what the levels that they wanted to, but it is still, I think, the highest in 25 years in absolute terms of spending. So it's a lot of money that they're spending in foreign aid, and I don't think too many people are going to be too distressed about the fact that they haven't reached the level that they wanted to get to.
I'm sure that's right, and there are no votes in foreign aid, but these people may not live in Australia, but they are far more vulnerable. We're talking about the world's poorest here.
Of course, and that's why I think the government has committed an extra $500 million this year. I mean, that's a heck of a lot of money extra on what they spent last year, and $500 million more than the year before that as well. So it's growing, as I said, at 9% year on year, and it's in contrast to what's happening in Europe, as is everything in this country, where the foreign aid budgets are being cut in response to the dire financial circumstances that they find themselves in the Northern Hemisphere. So it would be much preferable, in my personal view, if we could reach the target, but that's not going to happen this year. Hopefully it will happen next year, either under this government or another one.
Finally, let's go to the referendum that's also going to take place at this September election on whether the local government should be recognised in the Constitution. The Prime Minister confirmed they'll go ahead with this late last week. We've seen a small number of coalition MPs expressing their concern about this, but as a whole, the coalition have been supportive of it, although they want to see exactly what the question's going to be. Bruce, first to you on this one. Do you think there's any chance of this succeeding in September, given the confusion around this at the moment?
If both parties actively campaign on it, I think it's got a reasonable prospect of succeeding. If either party runs dead on it or campaigns against it, and we've heard Barnaby Joyce being a little bit equivocal about it, then I think it will be in a bit of strife. It really does need a lot of support for it. Look, and on one hand, people might say, look, why do we need it? On the other hand, I think people can just as easily say, look, this is a sensible move which will allow the Commonwealth government to directly fund local government. Why don't we allow them to do that?
Grahame, what do you think about the prospects of this?
Well, I sort of declare an interest here in that I gave the local government people some advice on how they could progress this a bit. But I'm still surprised that the government is putting it up at this stage, and I'm also very surprised that the government has sort of ignored our Indigenous brothers and sisters who thought that they were going to be put up as a referendum to include it in the Constitution.
There would certainly be more support for that than
I don't know.
Than the local government one.
I don't know. But I don't know what the thinking was. But on the local government one, look, I think it'd be close. Most people would be happy to see local government get a mention in the Constitution, but Western Australia is violently opposed, Victoria is violently opposed, Queensland very supportive, New South Wales, it depends on the question, and we haven't seen the question.
And you've got to get a majority in a
majority of states and a majority of people. And I think in this one, the local government people, the government and everyone else has got to get New South Wales or it's in trouble.
Well, we'll see. This will be an interesting debate, I think, as we get closer to the election as well, to keep an eye on. We're out of time for today, though. Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker, thanks both for joining us this afternoon.